I'm Tom Mennier, and you're listening to CVS Podcast. CVS presents a two-way Q&A with David Ross and Tom Mennier. This is part one of the five-part series in which David and Tom discuss each other's questions on matters of theological and cultural concern. A two-way Q&A, part one, questions on the Big Bang and monotheism. Dave, what is your view on the Big Bang and the age of the Earth?
Big Bang is hogwash, and the age of the Earth is roughly 7,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
The whole universe, roughly 7,000 years.
Okay, so what leads you to think this?
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with my content on my podcast, but I talk about it a lot. The dogma of the Immaculate Conception is what led me to believe that fiat creation less than 10,000 years ago is the case, and there are not millions of years of disease and death preceding Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
I never believed in evolution, even as an atheist. For 25 years, I never believed in evolution. I suspended judgment on the question. It repulsed me, the idea that I am an ape repulsed me. I never accepted that. And when I became a Christian, I stumbled upon the idea that there's a connection between the dogmas, which I give complete assent of mind and will to, the dogmas of the Catholic Church that I embraced in 2009. There's a connection between that and the basic metaphysics of these so-called evolution theories, and that evolution is philosophically untenable. And that sort of avalanche of discovery came about just when I discovered the connection between the metaphysics and the dogmas of the Church. And the dogma that did it for me was the Immaculate Conception.
Okay. Now, let's pretend for a minute that I'm not a Catholic.
Okay.
That I'm a typical world-instructed believer in evolution and disbeliever of Scripture. How would you go about convincing me of your position?
The principle of proportionate causality. You can't give what you don't have. So you can't get life from non-life, first of all. So abiogenesis is out of the question metaphysically because of the principle of proportionate causality. And you can't go from a fish or an ape to a human because there are more perfections in the human than there are in the fish or in the mitochondria. And a less perfect being cannot be the cause of a more perfect being. And the perfections, in order to subscribe to the notion of perfections, you have to subscribe to the metaphysical notion of natures. Is there a human nature? If you believe in human nature, that it's distinct from and more perfect than an ape nature, then you will reject outright all forms of evolution, period. So you don't need religion. You need Aristotelian metaphysics. That's all you need.
The thing is, now, I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. Why 7,000 years or whatever you said?
That's the tradition of the Church.
Okay,
if you go back to the early Church Fathers, they all knew about these notions of eternal past or long great ages. They knew about Hinduism and the claims of Hinduism. They knew about all this, and they rejected it. I don't know if their basis was metaphysical or divinely inspired, or it was the dogmas, or there was no dogma of the Immaculate Conception at that time that was explicitly declared and defined. But they had the dogma that God created a good world. That was well defined. And it's not a good world if there's millions of years of disease and death before Adam and Eve.
Okay. I hear your argument loud and clear, and I'm pretty much on the same page. Maybe quibble about the details of the length of time and the actual age. I will quibble with that. But I am in agreement with your principles. Now, my problem is, how are you going to get over this hurdle of, well, to be frank, everything you said to me, which makes sense in essence, is still going to come across as hogwash to a person steeped in materialist instruction.
The Achilles heel of the materialist is free will. If they're willing to admit that they're an ape, they're also willing to admit that they do not have free will. if you press any ape on this issue, I never use ad hominem attacks with these people. I use ad simian attacks because they're apes. Yeah. So these people are what I call monkey bots because they believe they're apes with no free will. Monkey bot. Okay, so if you don't believe in free will, guess what happens to your reasoning process? It becomes mechanical. It's automatic.
Yes.
So kiss bye-bye to your love of science because your love of science is arbitrary. It's just one configuration of matter, energy, among others. There's no basis. There's no philosophical basis, much less a scientific basis for saying this configuration of brain cells is better than that configuration of brain cells. So when an atheist calls me a moron, it doesn't mean anything, has no weight, has no value, it has no impact. It's not an insult. It doesn't mean anything. It is what it is because they're nominalists at heart. They don't believe in the human nature. They don't believe in universals. They only believe this configuration is what it is, and that configuration is what it is. And when they call you stupid or uneducated or unscientific or anti-vaxxer or whatever, it means nothing. It has no weight. It has no value. So the materialist position undermines itself. They're sawing off the branch on which they think they're sitting. And so they can't say anything with any meaning ever.
What I would say to that as a Catholic who is trying to reach my materialist brothers and sisters out there is that I do believe there is one part of the science in Darwin that is correct, and that's natural selection. The big error is that they conflate the natural selection with the origin of species, with the origin of life. And they're two different things, and even Darwin made that explicitly clear. So that life forms do change according to the necessities of the environment. This is called natural selection. This contradicts in no way whatsoever God's creation. Also, to the problem of the age of the universe, I will not attempt to speculate how old the universe or the earth is, but I would say with quite a lot of conviction that the manifestation of reality of the universe and of life on earth and who knows elsewhere happened quite suddenly. So I liken existence to something that's a kind of an inevitability in the way that an acorn becomes an oak tree. And I see life on earth as something that manifested suddenly, relatively speaking. I don't know how suddenly can be defined, whether it was in a single day or a mere 1,000 years, but in cosmological frame of time, it happened pretty damn quickly, like something emerging from an egg or a seed. So this is my view of it. I think that the theory of gradualism and chance has very little to go on. It doesn't stand on solid ground because no one was there to see it, first of all. And secondly, the idea that things came out of a single cell, and then, so what happened, what caused the single cell, these are conjectures. These are not founded on the principles of scientific inquiry. These are philosophies. So that's how I would try to approach someone who is stubbornly clinging to this theory of gradualism and the idea of life evolving from nothing or very little by chance. It doesn't seem to be a game of chance to me, for the reasons I stated. So
I want to say something I want to challenge you on the potential of the cold, dead universe. It may have been very hot, but I'm just using the word cold in the sense that there's no life. The cold, dead universe, if the Big Bang is true, and the Big Bang, by the way, is proof of God, first and foremost, even if it is true, if it is the case. So I'm not hugely antagonistic towards it. I just don't think that it works, and I'm explaining to you why.
Okay.
It has to do with act and potential. So there's no potential in God. God is pure act, but his creatures have potential to actualize. And human nature is a real thing. Ape nature is a different thing. Apes have potential for ape things. Humans have potential for human things. And the difference between an essence and an accident is another important Aristotelian distinction. And we have transubstantiation in the Catholic Church as a dogma that dogmatizes the Aristotelian concept, which is a God-given truth, but Aristotle discovered this truth of hylomorphism. There is essence and there are accidents. Okay, and Aristotle knew that only an essence can cause another essence, and a human essence can only cause a human essence because of the principle of proportionate causality. Yeah. So, if you want to say that there is a God and that things change from non-living to living and from less complex life forms to humans, then you're going to have to explain how there was a potential in these molecules, which were not even living, to become not only living, but to become human. And so this violates many metaphysical principles, not least of which is the principle of proportionate causality, which I keep harping on about, but it's very important to understand this. So the idea of potential, the potential of a bunch of molecules to become man, what they call molecule to man evolution, is completely absurd. It's completely unfounded. There's no philosophy ever that has made any foundation for that belief. It is just a religious belief. It's just a story. It's just a fantasy, and it's a satanic, atheistic fantasy at that. So that's why if you want to invoke God and to say that basically it's the secular view of evolution plus God and miracles, it's going to be a lot of miracles that you're forcing on this atheistic, satanic story to make it work, because the metaphysics isn't there to support the story. So you're going to have to invoke God at every step to bring life from non-life and to bring more and more complex life. So that's my argument against your vision of some sort of seed that's growing with the potential. Because the acorn seed, I'm sorry to tell you, it is an oak. It is an oak in potentia, and it has the potential to become an oak. That's why it has an oak nature.
Oh, no, but that's what I meant. But that's what I meant by the inevitability of a particular seed to become what it's going to be. That it's not going to become something else.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you know that monotheism is true? How do you know that there's one and only one true God, and that he is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, that he is infinite in every pure perfection, which means every perfection that it's better to have than not to have, because a circle is perfect, but God is not a circle, because it's not better to be a circle than not. And so this is the definition of a pure perfection, and God is the source of every pure perfection. He is every pure perfection, and all of the attributes of God are identical among themselves and identical with God. So how is it that you believe in that God and not some other false God? Why is it, and how do you justify that belief to yourself?
Okay. Well, I will ask you and our listeners to forgive me if it sounds like I'm beating around the bush, but I will begin with the problem that I have with this very popular atheist versus theist debate circuit that's going around with the new atheists. And I think that, unfortunately, to varying degrees, but most of the theologians that step up to that plate are every bit as foolish as the atheists, because they're walking into a trap. The focus here, and no one wins this argument. Maybe some of the better debates converted some hard-hearted people. Maybe, and I'll give it that. Who knows? I don't know. But I think that it probably does more harm than good, and it's for this reason. The debate is framed in a way, more or less, framed in a way that misses the point. And what this is for a modern audience that is looking for a scientific proof of God, and they will assess the power of the argument based on on these sets of parameters, what constitutes a logical and scientific evidence-based conclusion. This is no way to approach God. Now, I could refer our listeners to the arguments of Aristotle. I could refer them to Thomas Aquinas. It's all out there if you care to look into it. There are very powerful logical arguments that lead to a compelling conclusion that there is a singular, eternal, immaterial, divine source of everything. But I'm not going to try to persuade my listener, and I'm not going to enter into this logical debate, because this is the same as sort of, imagine having public debates about love. Is love real? And trying to approach it from a scientific angle. And then so you'd have neurologists coming in talking about certain brain chemistry and what's activated when the person feels this or that. And it's like, well, love seems to be centered in this part of the brain. And of course, when we study the brain, we're looking at we're focused on the physical, the senses. Okay, so the feelings, the things about pain and pleasure. We're looking at if we can see any insights into psychology, anger, repressed guilt, what part of the brain is activated here. But everything's sort of reduced to chemicals and feelings. And this is all fine and good in its own place. But if you're trying to get to the actual essence of life and the truth of God, you will never find it through these means. You cannot prove love. Love is predicated on trust and faith, period. Love is sacrificial. If it's not sacrificial, it isn't love at all. And so God, even though there are some compelling logical arguments that suggest a source that is immaterial to all being. And fine, if you want to look at it, I know of many people that started that way as real skeptics. C.S. Lewis is an example, who came out of atheism through study and meditation on logical arguments for God. But it didn't transform him until he really took that on and took the leap of faith and experienced God. So you cannot love something logically. You can logically come to the conclusion that this and that is true. But then if you do not take that leap from mere knowledge or recognition of logical constructs, if you don't take that leap to a deeper understanding and therefore a deeper love of the thing itself, then it really doesn't count for much. So Christ's first commandment is to love God, because all virtues and all pathways to full spiritual health is predicated on this first commandment, to love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, your whole strength, and your whole being. So, long answer, but to finish with the short answer, that I am convinced of the arguments. First of all, it's also intuitive. I've never believed that the universe is merely matter, certainly not chance. And I think it's laughable to think that the universe was a collaboration of gods. This god does this, and the other god. So no. To me, it just intuitively, and I know that's no excuse. We're looking for, how do you know God exists? This is really how I want to wrap it up. You have to experience love to know it's real. You have to experience the supernatural to know that it's real. You cannot. You can maybe argue yourself closer to it and then take that leap, but you will never be able to logically argue to someone who has hardened their heart against this idea. You will never get them there logically, unless they really listen with an open mind, and maybe you can push them closer to that threshold whereby they might take that leap on their own and experience it for themselves. So either there is absolutely no God and no spiritual reality at all, but if there is, it has to be one divine, eternal, immaterial source of all being, of perfect truth, perfect beauty, perfect justice, perfect mercy, and perfect and total love.
There are three dogmas that come to mind, and these are Catholic dogmas. These are God-given, eternal, unchangeable truths about the existence of God. The first dogma is that we can know God by the light of natural reason, and we can know, in particular, through causality. Okay, that's number one. The second dogma is that knowledge is not sufficient. We need to have faith. That we can know with certainty, but it's not sufficient. We have to have faith.
There you go.
It's the same thing with, it's the difference between hiring a prostitute and getting married. Okay, you can know the prostitute in that carnal way, but it's not the same thing as the loving, self-giving, self-sacrificial love of marriage.
That's right.
It's not the same thing.
That's right.
So we can know God, and we have to know God, and we have to know Him and love Him in the right way, which it requires faith. You cannot go to heaven without supernatural faith, hope, and love. Okay?
That's right. Yeah.
And then once you're in heaven, it's just love. There's no more faith.
That's right.
And there's no more hope.
That's right.
You've got it. You possess it.
That's it.
It's the nuptial. It's the consummation of that marriage.
That's it. Precisely.